Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Make It podcast. I'm your host, Chris Barkley.
And I am the fantastic Mr. Fox, a.k.a. Nicholas Bugs.
And helping us steer this podcast ship to its conclusion is producer Papa Bear and intern Sam. Fellas, say hello.
Hello.
And of course, with us is our
perfectly timed.
It was perfectly timed. With us is our esteemed guest, director, producer, Rich Hull. Rich, what's going on?
Hello.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Make It podcast. We're really excited to have you on, and we are going to talk about I'm just guessing based on the sort of pre-recording chat, this can go a million directions, which sounds like just my type of podcast, which is totally fine. But just to keep us on track right away, can you tell us a little bit about and tell the audience as well, what we might know you for, what you've worked on in the past, and what you're excited about and working on now?
That's I could talk for 2 hours about that alone, man.
Let's do it.
So I've been in media and entertainment for, I guess, about 30 years now. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Texas and went to school at Vanderbilt, just like Nick. And
let's go.
So I started my career as a film producer. I made 25 or 30 different movies at this point. I also started a streaming service that I started about 10 years ago. I was teaching a film finance class at UCLA and getting all these questions about digital and this Netflix thing. It sounds like it's going to be big. And so I started a streaming service that is now called VIX, VIX. It's we sold that 3 years ago to Univision. It's the largest Spanish language streaming service in the world. And then most recently, I wrote, co-directed, and produced what I think is my 28th film, but it's my first as a director. It's a documentary that Chris Pratt and I made together called Fighting Spirit, A Combat Chaplain's Journey. And it's been a crazy 4-year journey on that one as well. So I'm sure we can dig into the weeds on that thing, but it's been a really fascinating experience and a really interesting partnership with the U.S. Army, which is actually my second partnership with the U.S. Army. Halle Berry and I made a documentary years ago about Black soldiers that fought in all the U.S. wars we ever had called For Love of Liberty, the story of America's Black Patriots. And she and I won the NAACP Image Award and a bunch of other awards for that. And so this is actually my second collaboration with the Army, and it's been a really amazing experience, which we can surely talk more about.
Yeah, here.
Very cool.
What a career. And I just want to say, I really would not be here without the U.S. Army. My grandfather served for 20 years in the military, and he adopted my father, so without that military experience and my grandfather being overseas in Germany, I literally would not be sitting here in front of you. So it means a lot to me anytime I see someone make any film about the military that sort of sheds a light on the work they do. But to make two is really remarkable. I do want to just help the audience out here. I'm sure most of the audience, we have a really smart audience. I'm sure most of them know what this is, but just in case, can you describe what a combat chaplain is? What are we talking about here?
Well, it's not an indication of smart or not smart if you don't know what a combat chaplain is, because when I started this project, I didn't know what a combat chaplain is. But I think that's kind of the beauty of what we've done here, is that we've brought these untold stories of this completely unknown profession to most people to the big screen. And I think that's part of the journey that audiences go on, is they get this peek into this super interesting world that they never knew existed. So a combat chaplain, all branches of the military have chaplains. Chaplains are on Army bases and military hospitals, but the combat chaplains are the tip of the spear. So combat chaplain wears a uniform, they go to battle, but they carry no weapon, which means you really got to scratch your head to figure out why in the world somebody does that job.
You mean like a kicker on a football team?
Something like that. I would say maybe more of a punter, but okay.
Right.
So these guys go to combat with no weapon, and that's just bananas to me. And I was fascinated by that. I wanted to understand what would make somebody do that. And so obviously it's motivated by something much larger, probably something hard to put into words. It's not a job you do for the paycheck. It's really more of a calling. Mm-hmm. And so we had never seen the collision of that, which is a profession motivated by love, colliding with the chaos of war. And that intersection is, I've never seen that movie. And so I wanted to go and explore that. And I didn't originally start as the director, but as I got more and more into the subject matter, kind of raised my hand and said, I think I want to direct this. And I was originally brought on just as a producer because the Army wasn't paying attention to some guys that wanted to make this movie. And because of the project that Hallie and I did years ago, they thought, oh, you'll probably have a little trust with the military. And turns out they were right. And they were like, it's just one phone call. You got to do just one phone call to get the military on board. Because you don't want to make a movie like this without the military being on board, right? You want to be able to shoot, you know, current military people in full uniform. You want to shoot on Army bases, and you want to tap into their super extensive archives. So I was able to get the military on board. And then, like, you kind of know the rest of the story. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Like, one phone call turned into a lot of phone calls and more and more and more. But once I gotten deep on the subject matter, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I want to write and direct this. And it's been an amazing journey. So but into a world I didn't even know existed, with people I didn't even know existed. And that's the fun of it, is that it's like, these are untold stories. You know, combat chaplains, they go out and they like the spotlight to be on the soldiers. Like, they're there to serve the soldiers who serve us as Americans. And they like it serving in anonymity. Like, they don't like to be part of the story. And that actually turned out to be a big problem for us, because we had to drag these stories out of these guys and ladies who don't like to go out and tell their story. And that's why, you know, that's why you asked that question, Chris, is what do combat chaplains do? Because we don't know about that as Americans. Right. And that was fascinating for me. And it's also like one of these weird things where a chaplain like might come from a particular faith background, and all faiths are represented, you know, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, you name it. But when you're out there on the front lines and bullets are whizzing by your head, like, you're dealing with soldiers of all faiths and no faith, and you're dealing with like very existential life and death questions. And like, all that was just so fascinating to me. And so I decided to direct it.
Well, I like the fact that you actually delved into probably more than what we see in movies. So if you had said combat chaplain to me, I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, when someone's dying or someone has died, then you always see a chaplain come in. I feel like that's it. That is the extent to what we get to see. So the fact that you're getting in there and having these conversations about what is a day in the life like what is their experience like, not just that little piece that we get to see. You literally, like you said, probably opened up the world for, maybe, I'm not saying everybody, but almost everybody, because that's all we get to see. So I love that you did that.
Well, I think that's what I liked about it is, you know, I the first thing I did is there was a guy named Jeff Struker, and Jeff is a former Army Ranger who became a combat chaplain due to his experience in the Black Hawk Down incident. So you remember the movie Black Hawk Down? He's portrayed in that movie. And he sort of had this battlefield experience where he was like, I'm okay dying, but if I die, I'm going to make some changes. And I mean, if I don't die. And so he didn't die. And so he made some changes. And so I had remembered that from Black Hawk Down. We reached out to him and said, hey, would you be interested in, you know, being involved in this movie, letting us tell your story? And he said, sure. And so then we reached out to the Army Chaplain Corps, and they said yes. And then we reached out to Chris Pratt, who became my producing partner on this, and he said yes. And everybody just kept saying yes and yes. And the thing kind of took on a life of its own, you know, and it was because of those individual stories that were just so fascinating when you really, you know, start to peel back the layers of the onions with these people. And, you know, we're, you know, talking in a week where part of the story came to an end because the movie came out for Veterans Day in theaters in what is really one of the biggest documentary theatrical releases of the year. We had this kind of weird journey with it in the sense that we applied to 30 different film festivals and got a clean sweep, like denied at all of them. And
Oh, wow.
with the
What?
possible exception, we did a preview of an unfinished version of the film at the Newport Beach Film Festival last year. And so finally we were like, we're going to have to figure out a different way to get this movie out there. So we decided to raise a little bit more money and release it theatrically. We got a distributor, and then we made it a one-day kind of giant event for Veterans Day. And we ended up deciding that we would give tickets away for free to military families, and that would allow them to come to the theater and kind of see it together and have that experience together. And that turned out to be a great choice, because we ended up that got picked up by like every major press outlet and hundreds of influencers who were out talking about it to, I think the last count, it was like 120 million social followers. And, people were just so enamored by this kind of funky, almost nonprofit strategy, if you will, of just giving out free military tickets.
Yep.
And that created this groundswell of interest and goodwill. And then the movie sort of like blew up, which was amazing. We're actually, we are the only documentary released this year that's got a 100% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And
Wow.
so what the film festival directors may not have seen in terms of not letting us into their film festivals, I think the audiences saw. And that's what's so interesting about it, is that like we figured out a way to like get it out to audiences, and then they reacted. Like we literally have had 100% positive reviews, like glowing reviews from, the really big guys, the ABC Newses and the Fox News and whomever, all the way down to pretty much every military publication, every faith-based publication, tons of, you name it. And it's just been such a weird, unique experience. And, that was literally a few days ago. So we're like right in the thick of things, kind of really feeling so good about where the movie wound up, and being, super proud of it, and being thrilled that audiences felt the same way, because,
That's
I mean,
perfect.
Nick, I was just at Vanderbilt a few weeks ago, our alma mater, and I know
Yes,
Chris
sir.
was in Nashville, and they did a advanced screening of the movie. And so I've sort of been on this tour for the last couple months to do advanced screenings and kind of preview the movie before the kind of big theatrical Veterans Day event.
Right there in
And-
Surratt Cinema.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah,
is that
man. And I
correct?
hadn't been in there really since I was an undergrad. I think actually Halle Berry and I came and we did a little preview of the Black Soldiers movie that we did 10 years ago. That was the last time I was there. But before that, it was when I was, an undergrad. And like, by the way, it hadn't changed a bit. Like, and
Yeah,
so
the cinema itself is the
cinema's the
exact same. If
It
you
is
turn
the
your head
exact
to the left and walk up the hall, you won't even recognize it, because I don't recognize it. It's totally different. But I love the fact that cinema is the same.
it is. It's really cool. But
nostalgia.
it was great because like I've sat through these screenings and the lights come up in these theaters and you get to see the audience reactions. And so I kind of knew that we had something special, but like I couldn't quite prove it, because I would see how the audiences would react. And you would get these like, at Vanderbilt, 3 guys came up to me afterwards, tears rolling down their face, big dudes, former Marines, not the guys you want to meet in a bar fight. And they gave me a big hug and were like telling me their experience with the movie. And it was so powerful for me because, I think what started out for them as making them recollect their experiences in the military became a journey where ultimately they were tears of joy at the end, because they were like, oh my gosh, somebody finally gave voice to my experience in the military in a way that I maybe couldn't have done. And now I can tell my friends, my family, my community about what that was like for me.
Yes.
By pointing to this movie. Because what's so crazy for me, and I'm a non-veteran, and my dad was a veteran, my uncle was a veteran, my co-director on this movie, Justin Roberts, is a veteran. That was really important because we wanted to be sure that we were kind of viewing these stories we were entrusted to tell through a veteran lens to make sure they had authenticity. But when I talk to veterans, all of them, 100% of them have a story about a chaplain. And it may be just a moment where like the chaplain influenced their life, or it could be like a big moment where the chaplain saved their life. And so that's what these guys were coming up and saying to me, like, oh, I want to tell you my story about the chaplain. And he did something really special for me. And like, that's a powerful experience. And then general audiences are finding something very different in it. They're finding this peek into the world that we were talking about earlier that they just didn't know existed. And that's a fun journey. And I'm biased, but I think they like the storytelling. And then faith-based audiences are kind of finding something in it, which I didn't necessarily expect. I think they kind of view it as like an opportunity to, very unique situation, but an opportunity to show this like very unique world where you kind of get to live your faith, no matter what faith you come from, kind of every day, but you got to do it in a way that is universally accessible to all the soldiers that are out there. And these are heavy issues, man. It's really, it's crazy. And
and Chris, I know you've got a
bring
point.
that up, and it made me think about the festival rejection.
That's exactly, I was going to go there too, Chris. So you hit it.
Do you think that the type of film it is created a political bias at these festivals?
I think so, but unintentionally. Like, there's nothing political about this. The chaplains are not political. Combat's not political, for our purposes. And the movie's not political in the slightest. But I think that they probably may have seen that, which was not intended. But the politics of it all did influence our choice to go theatrical on Veterans Day, because yes, it's pretty obvious why we chose Veterans Day, big celebration of veterans. On the other hand, it was also 3 days after the U.S. presidential election, which can be a little divisive. Yes. And so we thought, like, wouldn't it be cool if people from all different walks of life could come into a theater with people in their community that they may not agree on everything with, but find common ground around the role that combat chaplains play? Like, how cool would that be? Like, that, how healing and awesome would that be, Right, yeah. And so that really played into our decision as well. And we rushed hard to get this out, because the next kind of obvious time to release this would be Memorial Day in May. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we were like, no, man, this is right after the presidential election. Like, this can be a source of healing for the country. And I think to a certain extent that's proved to be true. Like, I think, the country, they don't want a feel bad movie right now. They want a feel good and inspiring movie. Like, if you want feel bad, you can turn on the news or,
a lot of places
look at Twitter. Like there's a lot of places you can get that, but like, they want to be inspired. And I think that kind of proved itself out, by doing this kind of unique, almost giant one day, focus all your efforts on that one day on 125 plus screens across the country. Like, I think that worked, and I think
it's inspiring though, Rich. Yeah, because one of the things that I'm thinking about doing now, so my father-in-law is a veteran, Air Force, he did Vietnam. And as he gets a little bit older, the family is always asking him questions about things like, tell us, especially they're his kids, right? Dad, like, tell us about these experiences. He's a storyteller. He tells a lot of things. Now it's just like, let's just hear it all, right? Let's hear it all. But that's one question we haven't asked that I plan on asking, which is, can you share a chaplain story? And one of the things that you said was you kind of put all that energy into getting this thing out on that one day, making that work. But I think that there is a lasting effect that it could have, because the first thing that I'm thinking of is when you mentioned that soldier coming up to you or the veteran coming up to you and having a conversation at Vandy and saying that I wanted to share my story. So the first thing I think of is, how cool would it be to have that social movement? And I mean, just social media where people do hashtag chaplain stories. Just do that. It can exist forever, but put that out there, because I think it's probably an amazing story to tell. And to your point, that chaplain story might actually be from a Christian veteran who received some sort of advice, support, or hope from a Muslim chaplain. Like, you never know what kind of stories you're going to get, because again, they had to support everybody. So I think that in itself could be the chaplain stories could be something that is just inspired by what you did,
like his own
and continues
version
forever.
Of Brandon Stanton, right?
Yeah. Basically, people of New York, that
people
kind of
New
thing.
York,
Yeah.
his own people.
I mean, look, I should have talked to you last week, man. That's a good idea. But we did that. It happened organically. We didn't actually have to make it happen. We don't have chaplain stories as a hashtag. But what would happen is Chris Pratt would go and he'd post something about the film, and he was incredibly generous and gracious to do it, especially in a week where he was having a baby. He just had a new baby boy. And so,
shout out to Chris
and he's
Pratt.
got 2 movies that are like in production. And like, literally, like, the timing for him couldn't have been worse. And he found time to really be vocal to his 50 million Instagram followers. And when he would post something, it would organically happen that people were chiming into the comments and they were all leaving those stories. And it was really cool and powerful. And, you know, to go back and even just scroll through those is really, really, really neat. And you saw that across not just Chris Pratt's posts, but, you know, everybody that was posting about it. Even me, when I, you know, to my minor amount of social media followers, like people were chiming in, telling me those stories. And I think that's part of the reason the Army Chaplain Corps became our partner on this, because it's the first time they've ever partnered with Hollywood. Again, they don't like their stories told. They like to serve in anonymity. And so they did it, I think, because the Army is having a tough time recruiting soldiers and recruitment is down. And, you know, the Chaplain Corps is, you know, not immune to that. So think about 100% of the people that I talk to who are veterans who've got a chaplain story. Well, cut to 10 years in the future, what a shame that would be if there were only 50% of those people that had a chaplain story, you know? And so I think for them, they realized that shining a spotlight on what the combat chaplains do is a way to tell their story, drive some recruitment as well. And, you know, what was interesting about it is, like, when you see the movie, it's a very honest story. Like, there's some good and there's some bad about being a chaplain. You know, chaplains deal with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
As one of the guys who's a Muslim chaplain says in the movie, nobody ever comes to you on their best day, ever. And so, you know, and so like you get a lot of stuff on you as a combat chaplain. And one of the chaplains in the film called that combat fatigue, like compassion fatigue. And so that, to me, that's like a really interesting phrase, because as someone said in the movie, when you go to war, you come out and you've got these scars on your soul, which also I think is a really powerful phrase. And so you can become a better person, but you're going to be different no matter what. Those scars on your soul, they make everybody different. Well, the chaplains are not immune to that. And so we decided that we would look at that and talk about that and, you know, tell that part of the story too. So it's kind of dangerous for the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps to have been our partner on this. But we felt like we couldn't just make it a puff piece where you only tell one side of the story. We wanted to have it be an honest portrayal so that it would have authenticity. And honestly, I think that's what audiences are responding to so well.